The sun had barely risen when a small group of hikers made their way through the dense forest. Birds chirped high above, and the faint sound of a nearby stream filled the quiet spaces between the tall, leaning trees. The forest was alive with morning energy, and the group moved carefully, their boots crunching on fallen leaves. They were used to exploring, always looking for the unusual, the hidden corners that most people overlooked, but nothing could have prepared them for what they would find that day. As they climbed over a moss-covered log, one of the hikers paused and squinted ahead. At first, it looked like the shadow of a massive building peeking through the trees. It was unusual, certainly, but nothing that screamed impossible. They continued walking, curiosity pulling them forward. With every step, the object grew larger and stranger. The trees thinned out slightly, and suddenly, the hikers stopped dead in their tracks. Before them stood a massive cruise ship, its hull rising high above the forest floor, far taller than any tree nearby. It was as if someone had plucked it from the sea and set it gently among the trees. The sunlight glinted off the metal, revealing rows of portholes and balconies. The sheer scale of it was impossible to ignore. One of the hikers instinctively held out a hand, trying to measure the distance, but there was no way to comprehend it fully. This was not a small vessel or a broken boat. It was a full-sized cruise ship, complete with all the features that made such ships awe-inspiring. The group slowly approached, their excitement mixed with disbelief. How could this have happened? Cruise ships belong to oceans, not forests. Every step they took felt surreal. Birds flew away in small flocks as their voices echoed against the ship's enormous side. The smell of rust and old metal reached their noses, mingling with the earthy scent of the forest. It was uncanny, almost dreamlike, like something out of a story someone would tell to entertain friends around a fire. One hiker pulled out a camera, shaking slightly with the need to capture what they were seeing. Each photo seemed inadequate, unable to hold the true size and scale of the ship. Every angle, every corner of it looked intact. The paint, though faded in places, still clung to the metal, hinting at the ship's past life. Windows reflected the morning sun, and even from afar the interior seemed to promise stories frozen in time. They circled the ship, trying to find a way in. The forest floor beneath it was uneven, roots snaking through the soil like veins, and the terrain made it difficult to walk. The ship's hull was coated in patches of moss and climbing vines, showing that it had been here for a long time. Yet it didn't look abandoned in the usual way. There was no collapse, no major rust holes through the sides, just a quiet presence that dominated the forest. Voices grew louder with astonishment. "How is this possible?" one hiker murmured barely above a whisper. Another shook their head in disbelief. Questions tumbled into each other. Who brought it here? When and why? They had read about strange things in remote areas, unusual relics or hidden vehicles, but nothing could have prepared them for a sight like this. Curiosity eventually overcame caution. They walked closer to the lower deck, noticing small details that made it feel real, tangible, and eerie all at once. The ship's name was still faintly visible on the side, letters worn by time but not enough to fade completely. The hikers took turns examining it, pointing out balconies and windows, trying to imagine the life that had once filled these spaces. The ship's size became overwhelming when they stood at the bottom, staring upward. It was almost vertical, and the upper deck seemed to disappear into the sunlight, teasing the imagination with the promise of even more mystery above. Suddenly, one of them noticed something odd near the main entrance. A few steps led up to a doorway that was partially open. The hikers exchanged glances, their hesitation replaced with nervous excitement. It was an invitation and a warning at the same time. The idea of stepping inside a ship in the middle of a forest seemed insane, yet impossible to resist. They moved cautiously, one foot in front of the other, careful not to slip on damp leaves. Each step closer made the forest seem quieter, as if nature itself was holding its breath. As they reached the entrance, a strange feeling settled over the group. It was the kind of feeling that made hair stand on end, a mix of fear, curiosity, and wonder. The darkness inside was thick, almost tangible, but hints of light reflected off polished surfaces. They could see shapes that suggested stairs, corridors, and rooms. The interior smelled of old wood, metal, and a faint hint of sea air, though no ocean had been near for decades. It was a ghostly, preserved scent, and it made the hikers' hearts race. One of them stepped forward, bravely moving into the entrance, and the others followed. The floor creaked slightly under their weight, but the structure held firm. Everything inside was surprisingly intact. Handrails gleamed faintly despite the layer of dust, and the walls showed traces of elaborate decoration. It was clear this ship had once been a place of luxury, filled with people enjoying life, laughter, and adventure. Now it was silent, frozen in a moment that had long since passed. They wandered through the first few rooms, discovering tiny signs of life that had once been here. A teacup still rested on a counter, a towel hung from a rail, and menus were stacked neatly in a small office. It was as if the occupants had vanished in a hurry, leaving behind everyday items that would otherwise be forgotten. The hikers felt like intruders exploring a private world that time had abandoned. Every detail was a story waiting to be told. Outside, the forest seemed almost indifferent to this anomaly. Birds continued to flit between trees. Sunlight filtered softly through the leaves and the wind rustled branches above. Yet the ship stood there, a giant out of place, impossible and magnificent. The hikers took more photos and even began recording videos, narrating their own reactions, struggling to convey the wonder to anyone who might see it later. Words felt inadequate. This was beyond description. It was something that had to be witnessed. By mid-morning, word of the discovery had started to spread. One hiker managed to make a call, and soon local authorities were informed. The area became buzzing with speculation and rumor. How could a cruise ship possibly end up in a dense forest far from any coastline? People began sharing the images online, and the story spread like wildfire. Scientists, journalists, and curious citizens all wanted to see it for themselves. The hikers, who had stumbled upon it by chance, became accidental witnesses to one of the most extraordinary finds in recent memory. The authorities arrived cautiously, setting up temporary barriers and starting their own investigation. Surveyors measured the ship, engineers inspected its hull, and historians tried to trace its origins. But even at first glance, it was clear that this was not a common vessel. The craftsmanship, size, and style suggested it had once been a ship designed for comfort and adventure, not just transport. Yet there it was, marooned in a place that made no sense at all. The hikers could not leave, not yet. They continued to explore the exterior, marveling at how the forest had slowly claimed parts of the ship, wrapping vines around railings and letting moss creep along the hull. It was as if the ship and the forest were negotiating ownership. Each step revealed more of the surreal scene: lifeboats hanging from their davits, the bridge still intact, and windows reflecting the green canopy above. It was breathtaking, strange, and a little unsettling. By the time the sun was higher in the sky, casting bright light on the forest floor, the hikers had taken countless photos and videos. They had walked every part of the visible exterior and peeked inside as much as they dared. The forest, once familiar to them, now felt transformed. This cruise ship had changed everything. What had been a simple morning hike had turned into a story that no one could have imagined. As they prepared to leave, they turned for one last look. The ship stood silently among the trees, impossible and majestic, almost waiting for its story to be told. The hikers knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. This was not just a ship. It was a mystery, a frozen world, and a symbol of something that had been lost or forgotten. They left with heavy hearts, carrying the thrill of discovery, the weight of questions that might never be answered, and a memory that would stay with them forever. Even as they walked back through the forest, the ship lingered in their minds, a ghostly giant, quietly reminding them that the world was far stranger than they had ever imagined. By the next morning, news of the cruise ship in the forest had spread across the nearby town. People were talking about it in cafes, at bus stops, and in stores. Social media exploded with images and videos taken by the hikers. The photographs showed the massive vessel sitting quietly among the trees, almost impossible to believe. Experts, journalists, and curious citizens began arriving, hoping to catch a glimpse of the strange and magnificent sight. Authorities moved quickly to secure the area. Caution tape was stretched around the clearing, and uniformed personnel guided visitors to safe viewing spots. Surveyors and engineers set up measuring equipment to understand the scale and stability of the ship. Despite all the precautions, a crowd gathered, craning their necks and taking pictures. Children pointed excitedly, and older residents whispered stories of strange sightings they thought they had imagined. The forest, once a quiet escape, had become a scene of controlled chaos. A team of maritime experts arrived, drawn by reports of the unusual discovery. They had studied old ships, sunken vessels, and maritime mysteries, But nothing in their experience could prepare them for this. The leader of the team, a tall man with graying hair and a calm presence, examined the ship from the outside. He ran his hand along the metal hull, noting its unusual preservation. "It hasn't been here for a few years," he muttered to his colleagues. "This has been here for decades, maybe more. The forest has grown around it carefully, and yet it's intact in ways I didn't think possible." The team began their initial survey. Engineers checked the structural integrity of the ship. They tapped the metal, tested support beams, and studied how the forest might have affected the hull. Surprisingly, the ship had not rusted or collapsed significantly. The exterior, while showing some weathering, remained remarkably solid. Experts speculated that the ship had been treated or reinforced before being abandoned. Perhaps whoever had moved it wanted it to last, though no one could say for certain why. While the technical team worked on the exterior, historians and archivists focused on identifying the ship. They examined faded letters on the side, symbols on the bow, and any visible identification numbers. Inside the ship, the team carefully stepped through the entrance, mindful of both safety and preservation. Dust hung in the air, disturbed by the intrusion, and the floorboards creaked beneath their careful steps. Every room seemed frozen in time, with signs of human life left behind as though the crew had simply vanished. In one of the first cabins, an old captain's log was discovered, its pages yellowed and brittle but still legible. The log contained dates, coordinates, and descriptions of past voyages. Most entries described mundane travel across familiar waters, but the last entries became unusual. There were references to a final destination and plans for a permanent stay. The handwriting grew hurried, almost frantic, and then stopped abruptly. The historians exchanged puzzled looks. Nothing in the known records matched these notes. It was as if the ship's last journey had been deliberately erased from memory. The dining hall revealed even more mysteries. Long tables still had plates stacked neatly, silverware polished and in place. The chairs, though slightly dust-covered, were arranged as if awaiting a banquet. The smell of old wood and faint traces of food seasoning lingered, adding an almost surreal layer to the experience. The researchers photographed every detail, realizing that these scenes would be vital for reconstructing the ship's story. Every corner held clues about the lives once lived within the vessel. Outside, the forest seemed almost to watch the activity with quiet patience. Birds occasionally flew from the branches, startled by the sound of equipment and chatter. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, casting dappled patterns on the ship's exterior. It was hard for the team to remember they were in the middle of a forest and not on a dock beside the ocean. The contrast was both fascinating and unsettling, making the ship appear like a monument to human ambition and mystery. The experts debated theories, each one stranger than the last. One suggestion was that the ship had been transported for a secret project, perhaps a luxury resort or theme park that never came to fruition. Another theory suggested it had been part of an experimental environmental program, a vessel abandoned intentionally to study forest growth over time. Some speculated it was connected to criminal activity, hidden in the forest to avoid detection. Each theory had supporters and skeptics, but none could be proven immediately. Meanwhile, the public fascination continued to grow. People traveled from nearby towns and even distant cities just to see the vessel. News crews set up cameras and microphones, interviewing witnesses and experts. The forest clearing had become a hub of activity, though authorities carefully limited access to protect both the ship and the visitors. The sheer scale of the ship made it impossible to ignore. Every angle, every photograph made people stop and question reality. How could a cruise ship designed for oceans end up deep in the forest without explanation? The team discovered that some of the lower decks were partially flooded. Small puddles of water collected in corners, remnants of leaks that had developed over time. Engineers noted the importance of stabilizing the hull before any further exploration could occur. They worked carefully, setting temporary supports and shoring up areas that seemed weakened. Safety was the priority, but even as they worked, the sense of wonder remained. The ship was not just a vessel, it was a time capsule, a monument to a forgotten moment in history. Exploration of the ship's interior revealed signs of everyday life. In the crew quarters, tiny personal belongings were still visible. Shoes left by the door, books on shelves, and scraps of paper with notes or reminders created a sense of intimacy. The historians noted that these small details told stories more vividly than official records ever could. This ship had been home, workplace, and adventure combined. Even decades later, its presence communicated the rhythms of life that once moved through it. The ship's theater was one of the most striking discoveries. Rows of plush seats faced a stage that had been used for performances and shows. The curtains were tattered, but the decor suggested elegance and entertainment. Stage props, some broken and decayed, hinted at performances that had delighted guests long ago. The experts marveled at the craftsmanship, the quality of materials, and the surprising preservation despite decades of forest exposure. It was clear that whoever had designed and built this ship had aimed for grandeur, not just function. Outside, local legends began to form. People remembered vague stories of a ship moving inland, tales that were dismissed as folklore. Some elders claimed to have seen the ship being towed or transported long ago, though no records confirmed their memories. The ship's sudden appearance or sudden recognition rekindled these stories, blending fact with myth. Rumors spread quickly, and soon speculation ranged from secret experiments to hidden treasures. Everyone had a theory, and no one had all the answers. The team continued their work, documenting everything in detail. Photographs, sketches, and notes would be crucial for understanding the ship's past. Even the plants growing on the hull were recorded, as they helped estimate how long the ship had been in the forest. Engineers examined the structure, historians examined the records, and archaeologists considered the environmental impact of the ship's long-term presence. Every discovery raised new questions, ensuring that the investigation would continue for months, if not years. One of the most puzzling findings came from the ship's navigation room. Maps, charts, and old instruments were still in place. Some showed routes that made no sense geographically, as though the ship had been destined for places it could not have reached. The compass seemed intact, though it was difficult to test its accuracy. Notes scrawled on paper suggested planning, adjustments, and even warnings, but the details were cryptic. It became clear that the ship's final journey remained one of the greatest mysteries. Throughout the day, the forest remained a silent witness. The contrast between human activity and natural calm was striking. The wind rustled the leaves and sunlight moved across the forest floor, but the ship did not change. It simply existed, stubborn and monumental, holding secrets that no one could fully uncover. For the experts, this was both a challenge and a gift. They were allowed a rare glimpse into a forgotten past, yet the full story was frustratingly elusive. By evening, the site was quieter. The crowd had thinned, leaving only the team of specialists. They gathered near the ship, reviewing their findings and preparing plans for further study. Everyone felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. They had seen something extraordinary, a ship that should not have been in this place, yet there it was. The questions outweighed the answers, and the mystery seemed deeper than ever. As night fell, the forest grew dark and still. The ship loomed quietly in the shadows, its hull reflecting the fading light. For a moment it seemed almost alive, as if it were aware of the attention it had drawn. The experts left with notes, cameras, and samples, but the memory of the ship's grandeur and mystery stayed with them. The forest would soon be quiet again, but the presence of the ship had already changed the way people thought about the world, blending reality and impossibility in a way few could forget. The morning air in the forest was crisp, carrying the earthy scent of damp soil and fallen leaves. The cruise ship loomed quietly in the clearing, a colossal presence that seemed impossible to belong in such a place. Specialists and experts returned early, ready to venture deeper into the vessel. This time, the plan was to explore the interior more thoroughly, uncovering the secrets hidden behind its metal walls and preserved rooms. The curiosity was palpable, and the forest seemed to pause, letting the team step into a world that had long been forgotten. The first step inside was met with a mix of awe and trepidation. Dust motes danced in beams of sunlight that pierced through small cracks and open windows. The creaking of the floorboards echoed softly, filling the silence like a ghostly welcome. Each member of the team moved cautiously, aware that every step could reveal something remarkable or perhaps something unsettling. They began in the main hallway, a long corridor that stretched far beyond what they had first glimpsed. The walls were lined with polished wood panels, faded but still elegant, and the ornate lights hung from the ceiling, their glass shades catching the soft morning light. Rooms branched off the corridor on either side. Each cabin told its own story. Some were small and simple, with neatly folded linens and personal belongings arranged as if someone had just stepped out. Shoes lined the floor and desks held papers, books, and pens left behind. The sense of sudden departure was strong, leaving an air of mystery that made the team feel like they had entered someone else's life. In a corner cabin, a child's toy was still tucked under the bed, a tiny reminder of life that had once filled the ship. The dining hall, which the team had only glimpsed before, was explored in detail. Long tables stretched across the room, and the chairs, though coated in a thin layer of dust, were arranged precisely as if waiting for a meal. Silverware, plates, and glassware were still neatly stacked, some even polished to a faint shine. Menus, yellowed with age, lay scattered across the tables. The team moved slowly, taking photographs and notes, careful not to disturb anything. It was as if the ship itself had preserved the memory of its past, holding the traces of meals, conversations, and laughter that had once filled the room. Beyond the dining area was the ship's theater, an elegant space meant for entertainment. Rows of red velvet seats faced a stage, where tattered curtains hinted at performances that had occurred decades ago. Props and costume pieces lay scattered in corners, decayed but recognizable. The team speculated about the shows that might have taken place here, imagining passengers laughing and applauding while the crew performed elaborate acts. The theater's design spoke of luxury, creativity, and a life that seemed almost unreal in the middle of a forest. A staircase led to the upper decks, and the team climbed carefully. Each step creaked, but the structure held firm, surprising the engineers who had expected more decay. The upper decks revealed balconies and corridors with panoramic views of the forest outside. It was strange, almost disorienting, to see trees at eye level through windows that had once looked out over oceans. The contrast between the ship's interior, designed for the luxury of sea travel, and the surrounding wilderness was haunting. Inside one of the upper cabins, the team made a remarkable discovery. A wall-mounted cabinet contained a collection of journals, letters, and photographs. The pages were brittle, but the writing was still legible. Some letters detailed ordinary travel plans, while others hinted at plans that were never completed. One letter spoke of a journey to a remote location, but the details were vague and cryptic. The photographs showed groups of people smiling, enjoying themselves on the decks, unaware of the strange fate that awaited the ship. The team handled the materials carefully, realizing they had found a record of lives frozen in time. Moving further along, they discovered the ship's pool area. The water had long since drained, leaving behind a shallow layer of rainwater mixed with leaves and debris. The tiled walls, though cracked in places, still held a faint sheen. The pool ladder and handrails remained in place, and small lounge chairs were scattered nearby. It was difficult to imagine the laughter and splashing that had once filled the area. For a moment, the team stood quietly, letting the silence and the memory of activity settle around them. The emptiness was both eerie and mesmerizing, a reminder of how quickly time could transform vibrant spaces into ghostly echoes. Crew quarters revealed more intimate details. Bunks, lockers, and personal items were preserved, telling stories of the people who had worked tirelessly to keep the ship operational. Uniforms were folded neatly, and small personal effects, watches, combs, notebooks, remained in place. In one locker, a diary was discovered. Its pages described daily routines, challenges, and moments of joy. The last entry was incomplete, abruptly ending in the middle of a sentence. The team felt a shiver as they read it, sensing the sudden pause in life, a mystery that demanded answers. One of the most astonishing finds came from the ship's bridge. Instruments, gauges, and navigation charts were still present, arranged as if someone had just stepped away. Maps of seas and coastlines were pinned to the walls, and the captain's chair remained centered before the large windows. The control panels, though coated in dust, were intact. The team speculated about the last moments on this bridge, imagining officers making decisions and plotting courses that ultimately led to the ship's unexpected fate. Every detail hinted at expertise, discipline, and a life devoted to travel and exploration. As they continued, the team found traces of hurried departure. Some rooms had belongings left on chairs or tables, clothing draped carelessly, and doors left partially open. It was as though the occupants had been interrupted, forced to leave quickly. Yet no signs of disaster, no fire, no broken glass, no violence were visible. The mystery deepened. Why had the ship been abandoned here? Who had made the decision, and under what circumstances? Every step through the corridors added layers of questions without answers. In the engine room, the team found massive machinery that once powered the ship. The engines were rusting in places but remained largely intact. Pipes, gauges, and levers told a story of complexity and precision. Engineers examined the systems, noting how advanced the technology was for its time. Some mechanisms could have operated for decades with proper maintenance, which made the sudden abandonment even more puzzling. The room smelled of oil and metal, a stark contrast to the natural sense of the forest outside. It was a reminder that this ship had been built for function as much as for luxury. Throughout the day, the team took care to document every inch. Photographers, videographers, and historians worked side by side, capturing details that could be analyzed later. They sketched floor plans, measured rooms, and recorded the state of preserved items. Each discovery was meticulously catalogued, creating a record that would help reconstruct the ship's story for anyone who could not see it firsthand. The sheer effort involved was staggering, but everyone understood the importance of preserving the moment. Outside, visitors still gathered in small numbers, guided by authorities. Some watched from a distance, marveling at the ship, while others listened to experts describe the discoveries inside. Children pressed their faces against the barriers, imagining themselves exploring the halls, while adults debated theories about how and why the ship had ended up in the forest. It was becoming more than a discovery. It was a phenomenon, capturing the imagination of everyone who witnessed it. As afternoon approached, the team gathered in the ship's lounge area, a space designed for relaxation and socializing. The furniture, though coated in dust, retained elegance. Sofas, chairs, and small tables were arranged thoughtfully. Large windows overlooked the forest, creating a strange and beautiful contrast. Sunlight streamed in, illuminating the room and casting long shadows across the floor. It was a space meant for comfort and leisure, now quiet and still, yet full of stories waiting to be told. Throughout the day, the sense of time faded. Hours passed unnoticed as the team explored, photographed, and documented. The forest outside remained calm, indifferent to the human activity inside. Birds sang. The wind rustled leaves and sunlight moved slowly across the clearing. Yet inside, the cruise ship held its secrets tightly, revealing only enough to keep the explorers enthralled. Every discovery, no matter how small, seemed to promise more answers but also more questions. By evening, the team emerged, weary but exhilarated. Their notebooks, cameras, and recordings were full of evidence, and the ship had given them glimpses of its past life that few could have imagined. The forest, returning to its quiet rhythm, seemed to watch as the team retreated, leaving the vessel standing silently among the trees. It was monumental, impossible, and magnificent, a relic of a life that had long since vanished. The discoveries had changed the way the team viewed the ship. It was no longer just a massive object in the forest. It was a world frozen in time. The interior had revealed traces of human life, craftsmanship, and stories that demanded attention. Every corner, every object held a fragment of memory. The ship was not simply abandoned. It was preserved, a ghostly monument to ambition, adventure, and mystery. The next morning, the forest seemed unusually quiet. Sunlight filtered softly through the trees and a cool breeze rustled the leaves. The cruise ship stood silently in the clearing, its massive hull gleaming faintly in the early light. The team of experts returned, ready to examine the ship more closely and piece together the mystery that had captured the attention of the town, the media, and people from far away. The exploration inside had raised more questions than answers, and now it was time to focus on understanding how and why this impossible ship had ended up in the forest. The morning began with a meeting near the ship. Historians, engineers, archaeologists, and environmental scientists gathered to discuss their findings from previous days. Each team shared photographs, measurements, and notes. The ship was a puzzle, and every observation seemed to open a new layer of mystery. Historians pointed to the captain's log and letters found in the cabins, emphasizing the incomplete entries and cryptic notes about a final destination that could not be traced on any map. Engineers discussed the structural integrity of the ship, marveling at how well it had survived decades of exposure to forest conditions. One of the most pressing questions was how the ship had been transported into the forest. No records of towing, hauling, or inland transportation existed, at least none that could be found. Some locals recalled vague stories from decades ago about a massive object being moved, but details were inconsistent. Some claimed to have seen it on a truck or near a river, while others insisted it had always been hidden deep in the trees. The conflicting accounts only added to the mystery. Even modern satellite images from past decades provided no clear evidence of the ship's journey. Theories began to emerge, each more intriguing than the last. One proposed that the ship had been purchased by a private investor or company for an inland resort or attraction, a massive project that was abandoned before it could be completed. Engineers noted that transporting a vessel of this size over land would have been a logistical nightmare, yet not impossible with the right resources. Another theory suggested it could have been part of a government or scientific experiment, perhaps a simulation for living in isolated environments, or even a floating habitat that had been moved inland for safety or secrecy. Some experts considered the possibility of criminal involvement. They pointed out that ships had been used in the past to hide illegal activities, smuggle goods, or avoid authorities. Abandoning a ship in a remote forest could have been a way to conceal evidence. However, the lack of obvious signs of tampering, destruction, or damage made this theory less convincing. Still, the idea persisted in discussions among investigators, fueling speculation both in the forest and beyond. The team decided to revisit the ship's interior, hoping to uncover additional clues. They moved cautiously through the cabins, dining halls, and theaters, now looking for details they might have missed. In the crew quarters, a set of blueprints was found tucked behind a panel. The blueprints appeared to outline modifications to the ship, including added reinforcement for land-based placement. This discovery supported the theory that the vessel had been intentionally moved inland, rather than being left by accident. The handwriting on the documents was faded, but it suggested careful planning and technical knowledge. Meanwhile, the engine room revealed another important clue. Some machinery had been partially dismantled or disconnected, possibly to prevent accidental operation during transport or abandonment. Engineers examined the markings on the equipment, noting that work had been done carefully and methodically, not in a hurry. This suggested that whoever had moved the ship had done so with purpose and expertise. It was clear that the abandonment was planned, though the reasoning remained unknown. Outside the ship, environmental scientists studied the surrounding forest. Trees had grown around the hull, but not so much as to break through or damage the structure. Plants clung to the sides and crept along the decks, creating an unusual blend of natural growth and human construction. Soil samples indicated minimal disturbance, suggesting that the ship had not been dragged forcefully across the ground. Instead, it appeared that the ship had been transported with care, possibly over a carefully prepared path that had since disappeared. This raised more questions about the resources and effort involved in such an operation. Local residents continued to share stories, though memories were often inconsistent. Some elders spoke of rumors that the ship had been part of a luxury resort project that never opened. Others claimed to have seen engineers or workers near the forest in past decades, though no official records confirmed these accounts. Urban legends began to form, blending reality with imagination. People speculated about hidden treasures, secret experiments, and abandoned luxury lifestyles. The forest had become a living archive of human curiosity, history, and imagination. Journalists arrived from nearby cities, setting up cameras and interviewing experts. Videos circulated online, showing the scale of the ship, the preserved interiors, and the mysterious setting among the trees. The public fascination grew daily. People debated theories, posted photographs, and tried to piece together a narrative from scattered clues. Social media played a key role, spreading speculation and attracting visitors from further away. The ship had become more than an abandoned vessel. It had become a cultural phenomenon, a symbol of mystery and the unknown. As the day progressed, the team focused on documentation. Every discovery was cataloged, from small personal items in cabins to structural anomalies in the hull. Photographs, sketches, and measurements were carefully recorded. One of the historians suggested creating a digital map of the ship's interior, including each room, hallway, and deck. This would allow researchers to study the ship without repeatedly disturbing the delicate interiors. The team agreed, recognizing the importance of balancing exploration with preservation. Meanwhile, the hikers who had first discovered the ship returned to the site. They were curious to see the experts at work and to compare their own observations with those of the professionals. Standing near the massive hull, they reflected on how surreal the experience had been. Just weeks ago, they had been walking through a quiet forest, and now they were witnesses to a phenomenon that challenged logic and imagination. Their photographs and videos had helped draw attention to the ship, but even they could not have anticipated the scale of the investigation that followed. As evening approached, the experts gathered once more to discuss emerging patterns. The intentional placement theory seemed strongest. Evidence suggested that the ship had been transported carefully, possibly for a project that was never completed. The partial dismantling of machinery, reinforced hull sections, and careful placement all pointed to deliberate planning. Yet many questions remained unanswered. Who had funded the project? Why had it been abandoned? And why had no records survived to clarify the story? Public interest continued to grow, and local authorities had to manage the influx of visitors. Safety concerns were paramount, but curiosity was relentless. People respected the barriers and listened to guides, yet many found ways to explore nearby areas, hoping to glimpse more of the ship. Stories from residents combined with online speculation created a layered narrative that blurred fact and imagination. The forest had become a stage for both mystery and human fascination. By nightfall, the team retired to nearby lodgings, exhausted but exhilarated. The forest outside was dark, filled with the sounds of nocturnal creatures and the rustling of leaves. The ship remained illuminated by the last rays of sunlight, casting long shadows across the clearing. It seemed almost alive, holding its secrets and silently observing the world around it. Sleep was elusive, as every team member replayed the day's discoveries in their minds, wondering what new clues the next day might reveal. As days passed, the investigation expanded. Specialists in maritime history examined shipping records, ownership documents, and archives in distant cities. Engineers studied construction techniques and machinery, seeking insights into the ship's design and intended function. Environmental scientists monitored plant growth and soil conditions, hoping to understand how long the ship had been in place. Each discipline contributed pieces to a puzzle that remained incomplete, but endlessly fascinating. Theories continued to evolve. Some suggested that the ship had been a private project for someone wealthy and ambitious, an inland cruise experience meant for exclusive use. Others believed it was an experimental facility for training or research, moved from water to land to serve a specific, secretive purpose. The possibility of criminal involvement remained, though evidence was scarce. What was certain was that the ship's story defied simple explanation. It was a mystery that combined human ingenuity, ambition, and perhaps a touch of secrecy. Visitors continued to come, drawn by the allure of the impossible. Families, tourists, and researchers watched the experts at work, taking photographs and imagining the lives that had once existed inside the ship. Children pressed their faces against the barriers, asking questions about the ship, while adults speculated on the practicalities of moving such a massive object. Every observer brought their own imagination to the scene, contributing to the growing legend of the Forest cruise ship.